The smell hit Ray first. Sharp, like burnt copper, mixed with something chemical and alive. He had cleaned a lot of strange rooms on Orbital Station Vendara in 3 years, but nothing had ever smelled like Deck 3 did that morning that he pushed his cart past a group of HFY soldiers standing in the corridor. They were big, nearly 2.5 meters tall, with gray-green plated skin and forearms folded tight against their chests. They did not look at Ray. Nobody on this station looked at Ray. That was the thing about being a cleaner. You became part of the background, like a wall panel or a light fixture. Present but invisible. Ray did not mind it much. He found out about the twins the same way he found out about most things on the station, from the janitor channel on his earpiece. Someone on Deck 9 mentioned it first. Then someone on Deck 5 confirmed it. Queen Varash's hatchlings had come early. Twin royal births were extremely rare in HFY history. The last one had been 400 years ago. The whole station was on edge. Ray mopped the corridor near the lift bay and listened to the chatter in his ear. 11 attendants had already been assigned to the royal chamber. 11 had already been removed. 3 were in the medical bay. 2 had simply refused to go back and accepted whatever punishment came with that choice. The others had collapsed before they even reached the nest. The twins were emitting something, a frequency, a pulse. Nobody could agree on the right word for it. It came in waves, and it was doing something bad to most species' nervous systems. Ray felt it for the first time around midday. He was on his knees, fixing a drainage cap near the royal chamber's outer corridor when it rolled through the wall and into his chest. He stopped. It felt like pressure behind his eyes and deep in his back teeth. Not pain exactly, more like the feeling of being very deep underwater. He sat back on his heels and waited that IT passed. He went back to the drainage. See, the end of his shift, Station Director Bale was waiting for him by the equipment locker. Bale was HFY, older, with a long scar across his upper right jaw. He was holding a data pad, and he did not look happy to be there. "Ray Hollis," Bale said. "Yes, sir." "You are a Level 2 sanitation specialist." "Yes, sir." "You were near the royal chamber's outer corridor for approximately 40 minutes today." "Drainage issue on the east cap, sir." "It's fixed." Bale looked at his data pad. Then he looked at Ray. "You did not report any symptoms during or after your time in that corridor." Ray thought about it honestly. Felt some pressure, like altitude change. Went away. Bale was quiet for a moment. Around them, the locker room hummed with the station's air recyclers. A distant alert tone went off somewhere and then stopped. "The royal chamber requires a new attendant," Bale said. "The twins are not stable. They need a constant presence. Feeding, temperature checks, nest maintenance." He paused. "And cleaning. I heard the others had trouble." "They did. What happened to them?" "Neurological response to the hatchling's resonance field. Vomiting, loss of balance, unconsciousness in the worst cases." Bale looked at him flatly. "You appear to be unaffected." Ray was quiet for a second. "You want me to go in there?" "I'm telling you that you will report to the royal chamber at 0600 tomorrow. The Queen has been informed. This is not a request, Hollis. There is no one else available who has demonstrated tolerance. If you perform adequately, your contract rate will be reviewed." Bale set the data pad on the bench beside Ray. "If you do not perform adequately, we will know quickly." He left without saying anything else. Ray sat on the bench for a while after that. He looked at his hands. They were rough from the cleaning solutions, dry at the knuckles. He had worked sanitation jobs since he was 22. On Earth first, then a cargo liner, then 2 other stations before Vendara. He had never once been called into a director's office for anything other than a scheduling issue. He picked up the data pad and read the brief file on the royal chamber. 2 hatchlings, born 3 weeks early. The Queen had not left the chamber since the birth. 11 caregivers, 11 failures. That he set the data pad down. He finished his shift notes, put his equipment away in the right order, and walked to the small room he rented on Deck 11. He heated a meal pack and ate at the small table by the porthole. Outside, the stars did not move. He went to bed at his regular time. T0545, he was dressed, cart loaded, and standing at the lift that went to Deck 3. The lift doors opened. Ray stepped in and pressed the button. The doors closed. Nobody warned him about the sound. He had read the file. He had been told about the pulses. But the file did not mention the clicking, a constant, overlapping sound that filled the royal chamber like rain on a metal roof. High and fast and layered, two rhythms running almost in sync, but not quite. It pressed into Ray's ears the moment the chamber doors opened and did not stop. The room was large. Larger than he expected. The ceiling was high and dark, and the walls curved inward at the top like the inside of shell. The light was low and amber. Everything smelled of copper and something sweeter underneath, like warmed resin. Queen Varasha sat in the center of the room on a wide stone platform. She was enormous, 3 meters tall, even sitting, with folded wing cases on her back and long forearms resting across her knees. Her compound eyes caught the amber light and gave nothing back. She did not move when Ray entered. She watched him the way a mountain watches weather. Patient, absolute. The nest was to her left. It was a low, rounded structure built from woven thermal material and what looked like shed outer shell pieces. 2 small shapes moved inside it. They were maybe the size of large dogs, small for Drekvi, Ray supposed being newborns. Their plating had not hardened yet. They were pale, almost translucent at the edges, and they moved constantly. Clicking, always clicking. The chamber was a mess. Nutrient packs had been knocked over and had dried on the floor in dark smears. 2 monitoring instruments were shattered against the far wall. There were drag marks near the door, wide ones like someone had been pulled out feet first. Ray stood at the entrance for a moment and took it all in. Then he went to get the mop. He did not introduce himself right away. It felt wrong to start talking in a room this quiet and this heavy with something he could not name. He started with the nutrient pack spills because those would get worse if left. He worked from the far wall inward, slow and steady, keeping his movements small and predictable. The first pulse came about 10 minutes. IT was worse than the corridor. Much worse. It rolled out from the nest like a pressure wave, and Ray felt it in his chest, his jaw, the base of his skull. His vision went soft at the edges. He stopped walking and stood still and put one hand on his cart and breathed. IT passed in about 40 seconds. He kept working. Commander Idrin was in the observation gallery above. Ray noticed him after the first pulse. A dark shape standing behind the tinted glass, arms folded. Watching. Ray did not acknowledge him. He cleaned the floor under the monitoring station and checked the temperature display. It was reading low on the east side of the nest. He found the thermal regulator panel behind a wall plate and adjusted it. That part was not in his job description. He did it anyway because it needed doing. He was near the nest, closer than he meant to get, when one of the hatchlings rolled out. It happened fast. One moment, the small shape was inside the nest. The next, it was on the floor, clicking loudly, and then it was moving toward Ray's boot with an uneven, lurching walk. Its pale eyes, 6 of them, arranged in 2 rows, were fixed on him. Ray went very still. The hatchling reached his boot and bumped its head against the toe. Then it looked up. Then it opened its mouth and made a sound that was not a click. It was something higher and sharper, and it went right through Ray's skull like a needle. The pulse that followed was the hardest one, yet Ray's knees bent. He did not fall, but he sat down on the floor, just folded down and sat there with his back against the cart and his eyes closed. The pressure built and crested, and he breathed through it the way he used to breathe through bad headaches on a cargo liner. Slow in, slow out. Wait that IT passed that he opened his eyes. The hatchling was sitting on the floor directly in front of him, its head tilted at a sharp angle, watching his face. Ray looked back at it. From the platform, Varasha spoke. Her voice was deep and resonant and came from somewhere in her chest, as much as her throat. She spoke in standard, which surprised him. Clear and deliberate, like someone who had learned the language perfectly but used it rarely. You did not leave, she said. Ray looked at the hatchling, then back at the queen. Where would I go? A long silence filled the room. The hatchling clicked twice and bumped Ray's knee with its nose. Ray reached out, very slowly, and hovered his hand near it without touching. It clicked again and pressed the side of its head against his palm. It was warm. Warmer than he expected. Above in the gallery, Commander Idrin turned and walked away from the glass. Ray sat on the floor of the royal chamber for another 20 minutes while the hatchling leaned against his leg. He missed a section of floor he was supposed to mop. He would get it tomorrow. Before he left at the end of the shift, Varasha spoke once more. "Return," she said. IT was not a question. "Yes," Ray said. "I'll be here at 0600. He pushed his card out through the doors. The clicking faded behind him. The corridor was very quiet after that. By the fourth day, Ray knew their differences. The one he had met first, the one who had rolled out of the nest and pressed its head against his palm, was Kova. She was the bolder one. She moved with direction, even if that direction sometimes made no sense. She had already knocked over Ray's cleaning solution twice, apparently on purpose, and watched his reaction both times with her head tilted and her 6 eyes bright. The other one was Shira. Shira stayed in the nest longer each morning and watched Ray from a distance before deciding anything. When she finally moved, she moved carefully. She had figured out by the third day that Ray kept a folded cloth on the left side of his cart. She took it on the third day, carried it back to the nest, and when Ray gently held out his hand, she placed it back in his palm. He said thank you. She clicked twice and climbed back into the nest. He started talking during the pulses. IT was not a plan. The first time it happened, he had been in the middle of describing to nobody in particular how the drainage system on Deck 7 had been poorly designed from the start. And then a pulse came, and he just kept talking. It gave his brain something to hold on to while the pressure did what it did. Slow sentences, small details, the weight of a mop head, the exact ratio of cleaning solution he used on porous floor panels versus sealed ones. Kova started tilting her head when he talked to BY Day 6. She was following him around the chamber, the doctor. Lynn Okafor called on Day 7 through the station's internal comm. She was a xenobiologist posted on Deck 8, and Ray had spoken to her maybe 4 times before, usually in the corridor when she was coming back from her lab, and he was doing the overnight floors. "I've been looking at the data from the chamber sensors," she said. "The pulse intervals are getting longer." "I noticed," Ray said. He was checking the nest temperature while they talked. "The gaps are extending by roughly 3% per day. That started on day 2. She paused. "Day 2 is when you started talking during the pulses." Ray looked over at Kova, who was sitting beside his cart and watching his face. "They're scared," he said. "What?" "The pulses. I think they're scared. And when something gets scared and nobody stays, it gets more scared." He adjusted the thermal plate. They needed someone who didn't run. Lynn was quiet for a moment. "Ray, that's basically the conclusion of a paper I've been drafting for 2 weeks." "Well," he said, "you're welcome." Commander Idrin filed his objection on day 8. Ray found out because Bale called him into a brief meeting and told him there was a formal report going to the Galactic Council flagging a human service worker's unsupervised access to the Royal Chamber and the Royal Hatchlings. "Unsupervised," Ray said. "Idrin's word, not mine. The Queen is in the room." "I'm aware." Bale looked tired. "Continue your work, Hollis. This will be reviewed. Until then, your access stands." On day 9, Shira took Ray's cleaning cloth again. He waited. After a while, he held out his hand and said, quietly, "Can I have it back?" Shira sat with it for another few seconds, then brought it over and pushed it into his palm. Her head barely came to his knee. He scratched the side of her head plate with 2 fingers very gently. She made a sound he had not heard before. Low, smooth, not a click, something longer. Varasha, from her platform, made the same sound back. Ray kept scratching and did not say anything. That evening, Shira fell asleep on his boot. He was supposed to mop the east corner before his shift ended. He stayed where he was instead, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall. The small, warm weight of her settled on his foot. Kova curled near his knee. He looked up at the curved ceiling and listened to the recycled air point 2 months ago. He had been fixing a blocked drain pipe on Deck 7. Nobody had known his name. Nobody had particularly cared. He was not sure much had changed, technically, but something sat on his boot and breathed in a slow and steady rhythm, and he did not move until it woke up on its own. Kova, at some point in the quiet, pressed her snout into his palm and made a sound, careful and small, almost like the shape of a word in a language Ray did not know yet. He looked at her. He said, slowly, the Drekvi word for safe that he had been practicing in his room at night. she said it back. Imprecise, but close. Ray did not smile because it felt too big a thing to mark with something as small as a smile that he just nodded, and she clicked twice, and outside the porthole on the far wall the stars burned on. The Galactic Council representative arrived on a Tuesday. Her name was Delegate Surin, tall, blue-gray, from a species Ray had seen twice before and never spoken to. She had 4 staff members with her and a documentation recorder that floated at shoulder height and swiveled toward whoever was speaking. Ray was the last one called to speak. He sat in a small room off the main conference hall on deck 2. The delegate sat across from him. The recorder swiveled. Idrin stood against the wall behind the delegate with his arms folded. He had been in that posture so often lately that Ray thought he might leave an impression. State your role on this station, the delegate said. Level 2 Sanitation Specialist. And you have been attending the Royal Chamber for how long? 11 days. In what capacity? Cleaning. Temperature checks. Feeding assistance when needed. Sitting with the hatchlings during resonance events. The delegate looked at her notes. You have no medical training. No xenobiologic qualification. No diplomatic clearance. No, Ray said. I clean floors. She looked up. Then how do you explain your continued function in an environment that has incapacitated every trained attendant assigned before you? Ray thought about it for a moment. He did not want to give a complicated answer because he did not have one. I stayed, he said. That seemed to be the main thing they needed. The delegate wrote something down. Idrin shifted against the wall. What Ray did not say in that room, because nobody asked and it was not the place, was what Lynn had told him the night before over the comm. She had found records. Varasha had carried 4 clutches before this one. The first 2 had not developed. The third had produced 1 hatchling who died in the first week. The fourth had produced 3 hatchlings. All 3 were gone before their second month. The twins were a 5th attempt, 12 years of loss, compacted into that amber-lit chamber with a high-curved ceiling. Ray had thought about that for a long time after Len told him. He thought about what it meant to be that frightened and that exhausted, and to watch everyone who entered your child's room turn and leave. To watch it happen over and over. He understood, he thought, why the pulses kept coming. Why they got harder when people fled. He had cleaned a lot of rooms that nobody wanted to go into. After the testimony, the council met. Ray waited in the corridor outside and drank from a water pouch he had brought in his kit bag. Idrin came out partway through and stood a few meters away and did not speak. Ray did not speak either. Bale came out and told Ray the council was leaning toward restricting his access pending a formal review. Standard procedure, Bale said. Nothing personal. Then the chamber doors opened again and everyone was called back in. Varasha was there. She had walked from the royal chamber. Someone had brought her through a secured corridor, and she stood at the head of the room in a way that made the delegate's floating recorder pull back half a meter on its own, as if it had decided caution was wise. Varasha did not address the council formally. She did not wait for permission to speak. She stood and she spoke. She said that every trained professional had entered her children's space and found it threatening and left. She said a human sanitation worker had entered, found a mess, and cleaned it. She said her daughters were calmer than they had been since birth. She said the intervals between resonance events had lengthened by enough that she had, for the first time in 11 days, slept. She said she did not require the council's approval for what she was about to do. She designated Ray Hollis as Chamber Warden of the Drekvi Royal Hatchlings. The title was ancient. It had not been given in over 2 centuries. It carried no political power and no salary increase beyond a small stipend. It meant that one person had been judged trustworthy enough to stand between royal children and the rest of the galaxy. Idrin said nothing. The delegate noted it in the record. Ray walked back to the royal chamber alone because he had a shift to finish. When he pushed the doors open, Kova was awake and waiting near the entrance. She made the sound that was almost like his name. He crouched down. She put her head against his chest. He stayed there for a minute. Then he got his mop and finished the east corner. That night, he called Lynn and told her what had happened. She was quiet for a long time. Ray, she finally said, do you understand what that title means? Not really, he said. It means she trusts you with her children's lives. He looked at his hands. Rough at the knuckles. Dry from the cleaning solutions. I know, he said. I'll be there at 0600. He ended the call, and went to bed at his regular time. It started with Shira going still. Ray had come to know both of them well enough to read the small signals. Kova clicked faster when she was curious and slower when she was tired. Shira held her head lower when something bothered her. On day 19, at roughly 1,400 hours, Shira stopped moving in the middle of the chamber floor and held her head very low and made no sound at all. Ray put down his cloth and watched her. Then the pulse came, but it was different. It was not the rolling, building kind, the kind that grew and crested like a wave. This one came sharp and short, like a door slamming. Once, then again, then a third time in quick succession. Kova scrambled back into the nest and pressed herself flat. The monitoring console on the east wall lit up red. Ray did not fully understand what was happening until the lights in the corridor outside went amber and the lockdown tone sounded. He had heard that tone during drills. He had never heard it during an actual shift. He went to the door and checked the panel. Sealed. Emergency protocol. That he pressed the comm for bail. No answer. He tried Len. No answer. He tried the general security channel and got a recorded response. All personnel to shelter positions. Station-wide lockdown in effect. Ray turned around and looked at the room. Kova was in the nest, pressed flat, shaking. Shira was still in the middle of the floor, head low, making that sharp pulsing sound over and over. Then the east maintenance panel, the one on the wall to the right of the monitoring console, open from the outside .2 HFY, came through. Not in station uniforms. Their plating had been dulled with something to stop the light catching it. They moved fast and directly toward the nest. Ray stepped between them and the nest. He was holding a mop handle. The larger of the two stopped and looked at him the way someone looks at an obstacle they have not accounted for and do not consider significant. He said something in HFY that Ray did not understand. His tone made the meaning clear enough. Ray did not move. The second one started moving around him to the left. Ray swung the mop handle low and hard in the side of the second one's knee joint, the soft part below the plating where the leg bent. The second one went down sideways and grabbed the cart as he fell, pulling it over. The nutrient packs scattered across the floor. The first one grabbed Ray's arm. Ray let him. He reached past with his free hand and hit the wall panel for the chamber's environmental maintenance system. He had been adjusting that panel for 19 days. He knew every control on it, that he set the ventilation to reverse cycle and cranked the vapor output on the cleaning system to maximum. The chamber filled with white mist within seconds. It was a standard non-toxic sanitation vapor, harmless to humans, harmless to HFY hatchlings. But the concentration was dense enough to cut visibility to less than a meter, and it had a strong alkaline component that hit the HFY's nasal and optical receptors hard. Both of them started coughing. The grip on Ray's arm loosened, that he moved to the nest, put himself in front of it, crouched low where the vapor was thinner, and reached back into his kit bag. He found his station comm badge, not the general channel, but the emergency maintenance override frequency that all sanitation staff had access to. He clicked it in the specific pattern that flagged an active hazard in a restricted compartment. Then he looped it, kept pressing, over and over. The two HFY were moving through the vapor, slower now, covering their faces. One of them hit the edge of the toppled cart and stumbled. The chamber door blew open. .4 of Idrin's soldiers came through, armed, moving in formation. They crossed the chamber in seconds. It was over fast. Idrin came in last. He stood in the clearing vapor and looked at the two restrained intruders on the floor. Then he looked at Ray, crouched in front of the nest with a mop handle in one hand and a comm badge in the other. Kova was pressed against the back of Ray's knee. Shira had moved to stand directly at his side. Neither of them was making the sharp pulsing sound anymore. Idrin was quiet for a long time. The vapor dispersed slowly around them. "You're not what I expected," Idrin said finally. Ray straightened up. His arm ached where he had been grabbed. "Nobody ever is," he said. Varasha arrived 4 minutes later. She had been brought from the diplomatic level the moment lockdown lifted. She walked through the open door and stopped. She looked at the room. She looked at her daughters. She looked at Ray, standing in front of the nest with a bruise already forming on his forearm. She crossed the chamber floor in 3 long strides and placed one enormous clawed hand on the top of Ray's head. gently, the way you would set something down that you did not want to break. It was a direct vibe gesture. Ray had read about it once in a station cultural briefing that he had mostly skimmed. It was reserved for those who had protected royal blood. He stood very still and did not say anything. Kova clicked once. Shira pressed her nose against Ray's boot. Outside, the amber lights went off, and the corridor returned to white. Weeks passed the way weeks do when you have a routine. Ray arrived at 0600. He checked temperatures. He cleaned. He sat with the twins during the pulses, which were now short enough that he barely needed to stop what he was doing. He talked about nothing in particular. The recycling system upgrade on Deck 4. The way the station's rotation affected the way dust settled on horizontal surfaces. A bird he remembered from a park near where he grew up that used to follow the groundskeeper around waiting for worms to surface. Kova had started mimicking the rhythm of his voice even when she could not match the words. She would listen to him speak and then make a sound that followed the same shape. Up where he went up, down where he went down. It was strange, and it was oddly flattering. Shira had developed a habit of hiding his tools, not destructively. She would take the cloth from the cart, or the small calibration tool he used on the thermal panels, and carry it to the corner behind the nest and sit on it. When Ray came looking and crouched down and held out his hand and asked for it back, she would consider the request for a few seconds and then return it, very deliberately, into his palm. He always said thank you. She always clicked twice. Dr. Lynn Okafor published her paper on day 31. Ray was cited 14 times. She brought him a printed copy as a joke, and he read the whole thing because he was curious, even though a good portion of it required him to look things up. The conclusion section had a line in it that he read twice. The human neurological architecture may process certain resonance frequencies not as threat signals, but as environmental variation, enabling behavioral responses that differ fundamentally from every other observed species, that he thought that was a long way of saying he had a high pain tolerance and not enough sense to run. Idrin requested a meeting with Ray on day 34. They sat in a small room on Deck 3 with cups of something hot that a staff member brought, and then left. Idrin looked at his cup for a while before he said anything. I submitted a record amendment this morning, he said, to formalize your chamber warden designation in the permanent station registry. Ray waited. It is an unusual step for me, Idrin said. I want you to understand that. I understand, Ray said. Idrin nodded once and drank his cup. Ray drank his. They did not talk about anything else. But when they left the room, Idrin held the door and Ray walked through, and it was a small thing, but it was not nothing that on day 38, Ray's contract renewal appeared in his station account. He had 36 hours to sign or decline. His pay rate had been adjusted upward. The chamber warden designation came with a small monthly stipend that was, honestly, not much, but it was something that he sat with the form for about 2 hours on the evening before the deadline. He thought about what was on the other side of not signing. Another posting, somewhere. Another station, another set of corridors, another set of floors that needed cleaning and pipes that needed checking and small problems that nobody else noticed until they became big ones. It'd be fine. He had always been fine that he thought about Kova, saying the shape of his name in a language made of clicks and tones. He thought about Shira returning the cloth to his palm and waiting for him to say thank you. He thought about Varash's hand on top of his head in the vapor-filled chamber and the weight of it and the care in it. He signed the form T0600 the next morning. He was at the door of the royal chamber with his card. He pressed the panel. The door opened. Before he could take a single step, two small pale shapes barreled out of the entrance and collided with his legs. He stumbled back a step and grabbed the cart for balance. Kova was already climbing his boot. Shira had her nose pressed against his knee. He looked down at them. He reached down and scratched Kova behind the headplate where she liked it, and she made the long, smooth sound, and Shira clicked twice and looked up at him with all 6 eyes. Ray straightened up. He picked up his mop. He went to work. No one survived the Alien Queen's twins, except the man who never thought to run.